All right, Commissioner Otey, thank you very much for joining me today on this sort of strange Simple Coach to Commissioner interview. Um, I really do appreciate the time, and as a Mount Union grad, I'm very familiar with the OAC, but figured this would be great to speak with someone who has a much broader experience with sports in general and not just soccer related. So appreciate the time.
Thanks for having me. Always good to talk to an OAC alum.
Nice. Love to hear it. Hey, let's just start off with the basics. How does one become a commissioner of a Division III conference like yourself? What's your journey been like to get there?
Yeah, so holistically, I wish I had an answer for you. I think people become conference commissioners through a variety of different avenues, and mine maybe historically has been unique, but there are more and more former NCAA staff members that are joining the Division III commissioner ranks, so maybe not as unique as it once was. But that's my immediate previous position was at the NCAA national office. I was there for about 9 years, in a variety of roles. Started with the Division III interpretations and legislation team. So published the D3 rules manual, which is really exciting. I know people think they get into sports to do really fun things and not review NCAA legislation, but that's what I did for about 4 years. Eventually got to the point where I was the associate director of the team that provided rules education and interpretations to D3 schools. And then my last 4 years, I took a little bit of a left turn. There are only 12 or 13 full-time D3 staff members in the 500-plus person NCAA national office, so it's a very small team supporting Division III. So I knew that in order for me to advance and kind of round out my experience, I was probably going to have to make a move out of Division III. So my last 4 years, I was the director of student-athlete reinstatement and the primary liaison to the Division I Strategic Vision and Planning Committee. So that's the Division I committee that does inclusion, health and safety, membership, and a little bit of D1 finance. And took that role intentionally, knowing that I wanted to get back to Division III someday. I was a Division III student athlete and coach, but also knowing that I was going to get experience and particularly risk management and kind of public media relations experience in that Division I role that I just probably wasn't going to get in the Division III roles that I was in. And then one additional thing I'll share is that in my very first job at the NCAA, I was the liaison between the NCAA staff and the Ohio Athletic Conference. So in that role, I got to know the personalities of the OAC schools, got to know some of the players in the OAC. And so when my predecessor, Tim Gleason, retired, I wasn't necessarily looking for a job, but I knew a lot about the conference and knew that it was one of the few places that I thought would be a good fit for me in my next step, and had some conversations with the presidents within the conference, and it just ended up being the right fit for me.
Mm-hmm. So could you just talk a little bit about, all right, so two things. Why Division III? But rumor has it that you are a graduate of Washington and Lee. You're a general.
I am a general.
Is that accurate?
It is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah, that's okay. It'd be different if you said you graduated from John Carroll. I think I'd have some issues there. No, but what is it about Division III? Is it just because it's shaped by your experience as an student athlete, or something else?
Yeah, that's a lot of it. In high school, I was a big fish in a small pond, I guess. I went to a small private school and had some athletic success and probably thought I was better than I was. But went to Washington and Lee primarily because it was a good academic fit for me, but then had the added benefit of being able to play basketball there. And just had a tremendous experience. I mean, obviously WNL is a great school, and I had an incredible academic and holistic student experience, but certainly feel like my professional and personal development was shaped as much by my time on the basketball court and with my teammates as by anything else that I did on campus. So I finished school knowing that the Division III experience was really meaningful to me and wanting to stay involved in some capacity. But we didn't have a sport management major or sport business, anything like that. So I didn't even really know how to work in college athletics beyond coaching. And so it kind of just got lucky at a couple of different phases of my career to wind up where I am. But as I've gotten to know the nature of the NCAA as a whole and each of the three divisions, to me, Division III strikes the appropriate balance between making sure that we continue to prioritize the reason we're all in college and engaged in higher education to begin with, and that's our holistic personal experience and academic experience, but also balancing that with honestly a really competitive athletic experience.
Mm-hmm.
You look at some of the teams in the OAC. Look at men's soccer right now in the OAC. Just tremendously competitive, and I think people underestimate how highly competitive Division III athletics is, while still, again, providing that balance that I think is important.
Yeah, I do think that, first of all, yes, OAC in soccer is as competitive a league as just about any. And there's some great teams and programs, both on the men's and women's side. I mean, I always say in all my interviews, like, it's a conference that often gets overlooked, I think. Not sure why. I suspect it has to do because everyone OAC immediately thinks about the other football. Right or wrong, I think that's just the nature of it. It just sort of has that tag to it. But I also think that the difference between Division III and another Division II or one is the differences are starting to narrow quite significantly, because I think kids realize they could have just as great a student experience as they could at a Division I school, and then realize that not all Division I schools are, roses and wonderful, and some of them are, have as many struggles as everyone else. So,
I was telling somebody the other day, right now, I honestly feel like the discrepancy between tiers of, and I say that lightly because I don't think there's inherently anything better about a Division I program that's better athletically, but if you're looking at it athletically, there's more difference between the two ends of Division I right now than there is between the bottom end of Division I and Division III.
That is an excellent point. I've always said that, for right or wrong, again, the most, in soccer at least, the impression is Division I is all about the Power Fives, right? These big name schools that have, look, God bless them, right? Ton of resources, from alumni to just gobs of money sitting around. And I think the reality, to your point, the difference athletically and just program and how athletics are structured, the difference between top tier Division I and bottom tier, I don't know how to describe that, is a lot wider than Division I to Division III. I totally agree with that. That's a great point. Hey, 2009, you became the commissioner?
No, I've
2019. I'm sorry. 2019.
21, yeah. So
21, okay.
It's been a little over 2 years.
Yeah. All right, so I do have, some of these questions are, because this is new to me, talking to commissioners. So, and because you're a recent hire, did you have a mandate? Like, were you told by the presidents? I'm assuming that's who you take your marching orders from, are the presidents, right?
Yep.
Did you have sort of a mandate, or was there we want you to come on board because we want you to accomplish this, and this in the conference? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. The question makes sense. I'm not sure there was a mandate. We had a really productive collaborative conversation throughout the interview process, both to make sure that the things the presidents wanted to accomplish were within my skill set and made sense for my personality and kind of the way that I operate. But also me providing some ideas from an outsider's perspective of the ways that I think the OAC is, honestly, I think we underutilize our ability for national reputation and influence. Maybe because we're all within the state of Ohio. I don't know why. I mean, there are just a lot of avenues that I think are untapped potential. So my conversation with the presidents, and the thing that appealed to me about the conference through the interview process was, gosh, look at where the OAC is now. In my opinion, a top 5 Division III conference. I mean, you look at, in any given sports season, you look at the top 25, and there's an OAC school represented. Yep. We've got a reasonable shot to compete for a national championship in almost any sport. And we're providing, we got 10 schools that are providing a phenomenal education and a phenomenal experience to our student athletes. But even so, there's just a ton of untapped potential. We've started working on just enhancing our social media footprint, enhancing our ability to influence in the ways that young people are engaging right now. And there's just a lot of growing room while already being in a really good spot. And so that was an exciting challenge for me. The one thing that I would say is important to our presidents, and they made it clear in the interview process, and honestly, I think there are very few conference commissioners in Division III that aren't having the same conversations, is cost containment. I mean, travel costs are going up, the cost of doing business is going up, and enrollment numbers are dropping, not through any fault of our institutions necessarily, but just the number of available college students is going down, and that's a real challenge and something that is always top of mind for our presidents.
Yeah. Would you say that's the biggest issue? The economics of it, like just broadly speaking, and how these schools manage their athletic departments?
Yeah, so I think that's the biggest issue for higher ed generally. So broadly speaking, yes. I mean, I think that's the thing that keeps our people up at night within and outside of athletics, is just how do we make sure that we continue to provide a meaningful experience, knowing the financial realities that we're all facing. If you distill it down just to athletics, I think there are some other big issues at play, starting with the way the federal government is or is not engaged and involved in the NCAA, and the way that then impacts our institutions, either directly or tangentially. But none of that matters if we don't make sure that all of our institutions keep their doors open and continue to offer athletics meaningfully.
That's a good point. Yeah, that there's 4 schools that I can think of that closed the doors or will be closing. 4 in the last 2 years, right? Just can't function anymore, which is a shame, right? What's your goal for the OAC? I mean, do you have any? I mean, I gotta suspect someone in your spot has already thought about what's ahead, right? And so I'm just wondering, what's your vision for the OAC? Like, is there anything that you have that you want to do with the conference that might be unique to other conferences?
Yeah. So I mean, I think my vision for the OAC is to make sure that all of our schools stay economically healthy and viable, and create an athletics landscape in which they can meaningfully compete and provide experiences to young people that then develop those young people to go on and do great things. That's really big picture, and I understand that. There are plenty of smaller things that we're doing and working on that are means to that end. And prior to my arrival, my predecessor was incredible. First of all, he was here for 30 years. He did a tremendous job. Nobody in the world cares more about the OAC and loves the OAC more than he does. But they never were in the economic economic climate that we're in now. So just starting to find some corporate partnerships and corporate sponsorships, starting to find ways to help our institutions tell their stories in a way that conferences haven't necessarily had to in the past, that then helps with recruitment and retention and all of the things that our institutions value, again, inside and outside of athletics. And then on a smaller scale, finding ways to kind of create those flashbulb memories for our student athletes. So making sure that our conference championships genuinely feel like conference championships, as opposed to just another Tuesday night soccer basketball game on one of our campuses. Creating programming that helps support and platform underrepresented student populations in a meaningful way. There are a lot of inputs that then get at, again, the bigger picture of, I went to a liberal arts college, I genuinely believe in the value of a liberal arts education and a Division III student athlete experience. We've got to keep telling that story to make sure that that stays relevant to current and future generations.
Yeah. I'm going to steal that, by the way. Flashbulb moments. I love that. I have plenty of flashbulb moments here in my headquarters. They're all for myself. Nobody cares about my flashbulb moments, but except for Jackie. Anyhow, could you just talk a little bit about the presidents in the OAC? I stay involved with Mount Union, and the athletics and whatnot, but for my experience, that I was never quite sure, and maybe I think it's changed, but the commitment, the level of commitment that the presidents have towards athletics, I think it's fair to say that at times in the past, probably because there was no need, right? Like economically, there was no real need. Like athletics were, hey, it's part of the experience, whatever. And they sort of, I don't want to say pushed it aside, but it wasn't the primary tool for them in their mission. But maybe you could talk a little bit about that and sort of your president's commitment to athletics in the OEC.
Yeah, so I guess my first comment would be that I can't necessarily speak to what came before me for a variety of reasons. A lot of things changed, right? The climate of the NCAA as a whole has changed dramatically over the past 3 or 4 years. I think the way presidents are involved on every campus has changed since COVID by necessity. And has required a lot of active and creative thought put toward not just athletics, but every piece of campus life. So my experience with the presidents has been that they're very much engaged, very much interested in what's going on within their athletic departments, and are looking for ways to promote athletics. As for some schools, it's a big enrollment driver. For some of our schools are 50% of the student body is student athletes, and so without athletics, the schools would cease to exist. For others, it's a smaller number, but in every case, it's an important and meaningful part of their student body, and brings a lot of diversity to campus. So there are a lot of reasons for the presidents to be engaged, and I don't, it probably depends from one school to the next what each president's individual biggest priority is, but from my experience, they've been really supportive of my ideas, of the work that we've been doing, and supportive of their athletic departments in a positive way, while also recognizing that there are constraints on spend and things like that, just based on the realities that they're facing, kind of as big picture strategic decision makers.
All right, so the reason why I interviewed Commissioner Boldich at the Landmark Conference was because of, they deciding to use a paywall, right? Which, for someone like me, like it gets expensive. I'm not, and so, and I guess to hear you talk. And obviously, she made a great case for the pay-per-view. I'm not I'm not diminishing it. I still will call them the pay-per-view conference because that's who I am. Yeah, right. Like in jest, but I, I mean, is that this? I gotta believe you. Is the OAC? Is that something the OAC would consider, especially as you talk about the economic climate and these schools and how do they improve, get better, more visibility with less money? Because
Yeah.
that's sort of that's the perpetual battle, in my opinion, right? Like so.
Yeah. Yeah, so transparently, those are conversations that we've had and that I've asked our presidents to have, not necessarily with a specific outcome in mind, but I think those are conversations that the entire environment in Division Three needs to be having. At what point does the return on something like that cross the threshold and make it worth going in that direction and dealing with what I'm sure Katie's dealing with right now
Yeah.
in terms of public perception, complaints from
Right.
parents, and that type of thing. I do think there's decent data out there that the paywall, at least in Division 2 and smaller Division 1 conferences, hasn't changed viewership. It hasn't negatively impacted viewership, and it's resulted in increased or improved feeds and streams because of the money coming to those institutions that wasn't there before. So I think that it's a conversation that everyone should be having if they're not already having it. Our group, both the athletic directors and presidents, thus far has said we're not there. We don't need to do that. We're comfortable with the quality of the streams that we're putting out as is, and we're continuing to find other ways to increase revenue. So as long as I'm able to continue to increase revenue in other ways, then I don't think that's in the near future for the OAC. But the media rights conversations are vast, and I think everybody's having those conversations, whether they're admitting it or not.
Yeah. Right, that's the biggest. I mean, you look at what the big schools make on media rights, and I'm not saying it can be replicated at Division 3, but I'm sure that certain schools, conferences could elicit more than others, right? Like there's a discussion to be had. Yeah, I get that.
Well,
Um,
and we also, I mean, we charge admission to all of our games because we believe there's value in the product. And so, that's a philosophical part of the
right.
conversation. I like taking a step back and always looking at things from the 30,000-foot view. But I believe that the OAC has a value proposition on the product that we're putting on the court, on the field. And so that then begs the question of what are we doing to derive that value from what we're putting out. And right now, that's not the answer for us, and that's okay. Kudos to Katie and the Landmark for having the guts to go first on that, because I think it's sparked a lot of interesting debate.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I will agree with you there. Interesting debate. I mean, I get it, right? Like again, it's like I get it. I totally understand it. It's a painful reality, right? Sometimes that you have to cross whether you want to or not. That might drive a lot of decisions. And I could see some conferences across the landscape, and that this could be the lifeline. That I don't want to say lifeline. That's maybe a little too dramatic, but significant revenue to come into these schools that are in dire needs of it, right? And I'm making up a number, but $50,000, $100,000 into an athletic department can be significant. So, yeah, it's material, right? So, all right. So I'm going to ask you something that's again same broad. Guess a lot of the things in the soccer world, right? That happen. We are sort of right, what Division 1 does, everyone else does. It's just a matter of the voting and whatnot. Like so I'm just curious. I mean, I've read at some points that there's some folks who are saying that there should be a way in which Division 3 can be governed by its own Division 3 rules and not necessarily right? I don't want to say split the divisions apart, but allow them to sort of operate in the best interest of that division, right? So Division One can legitimately pursue the fall spring model because they think that's best for Division One, and it doesn't necessarily have to apply to Division Three. Do you have any thoughts on that? I mean, am I totally off base in reading it that way? Or?
No, and in fact, in most lanes that we would talk about, that exists already. So when it comes to broad NCAA compliance rules, there are very few that are association wide. Most of them are division specific. So Division III playing and practice seasons. So when the playing season starts, when it ends, how many games a sport plays, all of that can be voted on and decided by Division III members in isolation, and it absolutely does not have to follow Division I. It's actually harder, although now possible, just recently, to change sport-specific playing rules. So in soccer, 5 yellow cards and you sit a game.
Yeah.
Hypothetically, Division III could propose their own division-specific rule on yellow cards that would only impact Division III. There are a lot more hoops to jump through in order to get it done when we're talking about specific playing rules, and there are parameters on the types of rules that can be impacted by that sort of federated model. But again, anything big picture from a like broad compliance standpoint is already that's already an available process.
All right, so I'm going to ask you the same, and I'm going to stage it the same way I did with Commissioner Boldvich. All right, so this is something that we've talked about since I've been doing the channel, and probably longer, is just the ridiculous schedule that soccer specific, totally to clarify, the schedule that programs face every fall. I found this on Exeter, or whatever we call it, Twitter, X. I think I'm going to stick with Exeter. It seems like the most. Yeah, it's like the one that flows off the tongue, the easiest. So, and then I did some math. Leo Messi, arguably the greatest soccer player of all time, professionally, played 71 games in 2011. If you did some math and you extrapolated, a Division III soccer player would play 17 games in 58 days, which would translate into 91 games in a 300-day calendar year. So I'm just curious, and I don't. It's not you, right? Like but it is. I am putting it on you for the sake of discussion. But at what point does was a commissioner for a conference stand up for the student athlete and say, you know what, we have to figure out a better situation for just their simple health? And I'll just say personally, I still remember, playing, and I was a goalkeeper, and by come October, I think I was walking wounded. Like, I hurt everywhere, and I think it was just the nature of the training. But anyhow, I'll just leave it there.
So one of the first things you learn as a commissioner of a conference, or really anywhere else in athletics, or at least one of the first things I learned, is to try not to have an opinion on things that I'm not the most educated person in the room on. So these are, and I'm not sure what Katie told you. I'm sure she's really well versed in a lot of this. But so these are ongoing conversations. It's been a conversation in Division III soccer, for as long as I can remember. And there is a committee at the NCAA, the Committee on Competitive Safeguards and Medical Aspects of Sport, that are much more much more appropriate source than me to determine the actual health and safety impact on student athletes. The current playing season is sort of confined the way that it is for two reasons. One, on the front end, it's a finances issue, right? So you bring soccer players back to campus any earlier, they're already coming in before school starts. That's money that the schools have to spend to have them on campus before the campus is actually open. So there's the financial concern on the front end, and then the NCAA championship date is kind of the bookend on the other side. So there are a couple of options. One, we spend more money on the front end, or two, we move the championship date. I know there's the fall spring model conversation out there as well, which is also
it's never going to happen Division III as far as I'm concerned.
I think
to
it's
be realistic.
unlikely. And volleyball recently moved their NCAA championship back a week later in the fall. And softball actually recently moved their NCAA championship a week later in the spring. So the model exists to get that accomplished and add a week or a week plus or minus to the season.
Right.
The other reality, and nobody, I'm going to be unpopular for saying this, but
I like this sort of thing. All right.
And I'm not saying that I'm a proponent of this, but the other option is to reduce the number of games that division plays. Yeah. So, right, but I mean, the thing is, when we start talking about problems, I think, especially in today's climate, all of the potential solutions have to be on the table, and people don't necessarily like all of the solutions that are on the table. And so that's why we get into these conversations that last 3, 4, 5 years, because it's like, well, here's a way we could solve it. Okay, but we don't want to solve it that way.
I think people might make a picture of you and like put you on a board somewhere. Wanted.
That's my vote. I'm just saying that's an option.
I know. I get it. Yeah, I've heard this before. Like the reality is I think, what is it, a minimum of you got to play like 15 games. I think the minimum might be 14, 15. I can't remember what that is.
And then the maximum is either 20 or
21. I think so. Yeah, I totally get that. But we soccer folks don't want to talk about that one. Absolutely. That's not the solution that we want. Anyhow, no, but that's fair. That's fair. I get it, especially when you're trying to solve. Look, the one thing, and again, I told, when I was talking last week, that I mentioned to Commissioner Boldvich that like. The cool thing about talking to you or to her at the time was that, I think I'm a smart guy, right? Like, and I have the levels of complexity. What does it mean, right? And I think it's just my business background, right? Like, okay, you make a decision here. You think it's only there's only going to impact these two areas, but then you talk to somebody who's knee deep and you're like, oh, you didn't think of this, and you didn't think of this, and you didn't think. And I think that's the reality of this sort of decision, especially, what I've been proposing, push the conference the national championship out a week at the beginning. You've just stretched the season out 2 weeks. Well, what does that entail? Yeah. Right?
Yep.
And I think that's the reality. Like, you got an economic impact. I didn't even think about, you got the trainers you got to worry about. You got to...
Trainers and sports information, honestly, they're the two most overworked and underpaid groups in our athletic departments. It's difficult to recruit and retain those folks in those professions right now because of how many hours we're asking them to work for relatively little pay. And so any proposal that's going to even further increase the workload of an already very strapped population that's tough, but that's why my very first comment is I think first and foremost we need to think about the health and safety of our student athletes. That's always top of mind for me. I just recognize that I'm not the expert in the room on that topic, and so I need to rely on the people with the appropriate education and background to inform me. Everything else is secondary to that, but it does all play a part.
Yeah. Well, I will just say I have multiple degrees from Twitter University, so I'm an expert in everything. So, and worst comes to worst, give me 5 minutes.
You and everyone else, Paul.
I love that. I have they're all plastered all over my office. Um, yeah, I ask, this is a silly question, and it's more my, just my competitive side. Like, do you compete with other conferences? Like, you as a commissioner, are you competing with Commissioner Bullvich at the landmark? And, are you always trying to one up the other guy in a healthy sort of way? Well, maybe not a healthy way, but in a healthy sort of way.
I hope it's healthy, but yeah, absolutely. I mean, I keep an eye on, the number of OAC teams that make it into a national tournament compared to other conferences that get multiple bids. Friendly rivalries within the state. So our schools, you know this, right? But our most frequent opponents are North Coast Athletic Conference schools and Heartland.
We don't like them.
Pack. Yeah. So I've got great relationships with those commissioners, but also friendly rivalries as well, and we tease each other when we're playing each other. It's a really good group. Katie's an example of somebody that our schools don't play each other all that often, but I think of Katie as a mentor and a great resource for me. But if we're playing them in a national championship, I absolutely want to beat them. And you don't get into sports, you don't work in athletics unless you're competitive by nature. And if I go to an OAC event tonight, I don't get to cheer. I just stand on the sidelines and hope that nobody gets hurt and that there's no drama and that, the age old, I hope everybody has a good time. But when it's preseason non-conference competition or it gets to national championship competition, I get to be a fan again, which is a blast. And of course, I want our OAC schools to win.
Yeah. That's the one thing I think I would struggle with if I ever became a commissioner is I just get caught up in the moment. Like, I'd be that guy. Like, who's that crazy guy running down the sideline? Like, oh, that's the commissioner of the conference. Like, Paul, he shouldn't be doing that.
You'll like my first year with the OAC. Mount Union played my alma mater in the first round of the NCAA football championship, and I was more excited for that game than anything else because I could not wait to tease my former athletic director and former conference commissioner when the Mount Union beat W&L.
That's awesome. Wait, what was gonna? Yeah, I always wonder about that, as silly as it is, because you represent, but you're an organization, right? And I always wonder about that. Is there, like, what role does the conference play? I mean, I'm assuming rules, regulations, and whatnot. And there's a reason why I'm asking this off the cuff right now. Like, what? To maintain discipline. I mean, healthy competition is good. Unhealthy competition is bad. That's the caveat. But like, to what extent is the conference responsible for that? And you could comment, and then I'll tell you why.
Yeah, so it probably varies from one conference to the next. So again, I like to take a step back and think of everything kind of big picture. And if my role as the conference office is to facilitate athletic competition in a way that develops our young people for a life after sport, then doing so in a healthy and productive way is absolutely of utmost importance. The OAC does take, so if you're talking about sportsmanship issues or things like that, the OAC does take that very seriously. We actually revised our policy my first year here with the conference so that there is a mechanism within our conference governance structure for issues to be sort of adjudicated if the two schools cannot agree on an outcome. Two involved schools cannot agree on an outcome. There's a mechanism for additional conference involvement. My first choice in any of those situations would be for the adults involved to step up and manage the situation and do the right thing. And if that's done to everyone's satisfaction, then that's best case scenario for everyone involved. But our coaches are competitive, our athletic directors are competitive, and so we realize that there also needs to be a mechanism for intervention if and when that becomes necessary. And we've been fortunate since we rewrote that policy to not really have any scenarios that rose to that level. But as you can imagine with pretty much any policy, it's written in response to something that wasn't handled the way we wanted.
Usually that's why they come out, right? They get created because of something, right? Like, oh, we have to have a alternative way. Yeah, no, the only reason why I'm bringing that up is because this week there was a game that what I think was pretty ugly. Like, a kid ended up going to the hospital. There were 5 red cards. There were fights. The referee was totally whatever. And it was ugly. It was, it crosses the boundary. Like, I'm all about competition, trash talk, all that stuff. Love it. I embrace that. But when it gets, like, there's a threshold, right? You pass that, and I think everything's lost. And so that's why I was asking about that.
Well, and the other role that conference commissioners play in that scenario, and I don't want you to tell me on the air, but if that was one of my schools, let's talk off the air. The other role that conference commissioners play is most of us hire and supervise the coordinators of officials for every sport group. So if we're talking about soccer, then I've got a guy that assigns and supervises all of our soccer officials. And so when there is feedback on how our officials could have better managed a game, it's my responsibility to make sure that he's delivering that message and holding his officials accountable for that.
Okay. It was not your conference. It was not the OAC. I think I probably create more scuttlebutt when I talk to some of the coaches.
You're drumming up.
Yeah, like, boy, I hate you, but we're going to have a good conversation today. Or I hate what you represent. Lastly, is there, oh, no, this is not lastly. Sorry. I have another question. Like, and this is totally a Homer type question, but how big of a deal is it for a conference like the OAC to have a super successful sport? And I would say super successful, whether that's football, now basketball, baseball. I mean, like, how big of a deal is it for your conference? How much easier, more complex does it make your job as a commissioner?
It's tremendous for us. I mean, I think anything that elevates the profile of the conference in a positive and meaningful way is a positive, in my opinion. So, obviously the elephant in the room, if it's Mount Union football, if it's Marietta baseball, but we've had 2 different teams in the men's basketball Final Four in my tenure. We've got some really successful track and field and cross country teams.
Oh, the track and field too. Is
cross country individual national champions. All of those things draw eyeballs to the conference, allow our schools to better recruit students. Students see the success of the conference and want to be a part of it. That's a positive because that helps our schools stay healthy and helps our conference sort of the rising tide metaphor, right? So I think that's all positive in my opinion. In my mind, it doesn't make my life any more difficult because the way that I'm gonna manage and deal with a national championship contender coach is the same way I'm gonna manage the 10th best team in the OAC. Our athletic directors may find it more difficult just because of their proximity to those coaches compared to mine. But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, my standards and expectations for all of our coaches are the same, regardless of their level of competitive athletic success. Because again, I kind of go back to my principles, which is developing students and developing young people.
Mm-hmm. So do you get to go to all those games?
I try to. another aspect of being a commissioner that I came from, coming from a sort of corporate environment like the NCAA where, somebody's managing my budget and somebody's like I have an IT staff and an HR staff and all that. I am all of those things now. And so as long as I have the travel budget to accommodate it, I've been to the wrestling national championship the last couple of years. Baldwin Wallace. Oh gosh, really I can't remember if they finished second or third last year, but they're tremendous.
Tremendous.
And so I make it a priority that whenever we have a team that's competing at that level, if there's any way I can make it work, I try to be there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, BW is that I think they've always been the standard, right, in wrestling. But did you go? Did you go to the football national championship at the? Yeah, I was there. There.
And my first year, we actually hosted. Mount Union was unfortunately not in it, but we hosted in Canton at the Hall of Fame Stadium, and then I was at Navy last year. I've been at both Final Fours. The one where we've had two teams, Marietta and Baldwin Wallace, both have made the College World Series. Yeah. And just based on timing with our president's meetings, I wasn't able to make those trips. But that's the one event where we've had teams at a final site in contention, and I haven't been able to make it.
Yeah. All right, Commissioner, I'm going to let you go. Get on with your day. I am very grateful and appreciative that you decided to talk to me. Like this is great. This really my big thing lately is I got to broaden my view about things and not be so narrow, and I think it helps to understand things better and the complexities of sports at the collegiate level. So really grateful you took the time today.
Well, thanks for having me, and thanks for being open to the conversation. Let's connect at a Mount Union event here at some point.
Absolutely. We definitely will. Maybe the national championship.
All right.
One of them. So. All right. Thank you very much.
You got it, Paul. Take care.
All right.